Hi, I'm Pranamya and welcome back to Pages of the Globe. So if you're new to my channel or you just want a quick refresher of what my channel is about, I essentially post videos about short stories and poems. I'll read them aloud and then I'll give you a quick analysis on them and I'll tell you about maybe what historical context they come from or a little about the author, why the author chose to write this, things like that. If you want to know more, you can always check out the introductory video on my channel, but without further ado, let's get on with the video. All right, so the story that I'm going to be reading to you today is called The Open Window by H.H. Munro or Saki. Now imagine visiting this stranger's house in the countryside, expecting like quiet, polite conversation, probably boring, only to have the unexpected creep in through the open window. This is a beautifully crafted short story by Saki, and it is the perfect mix of wit, irony, and a psychological twist. It's honestly, as I'm reading the story, you will literally hear me laughing because as I'm reading it, I'm like realizing what's happening, and I think it's quite funny. I think it's a very humorous story. So before I start with the story, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who was the author behind it, who wrote The Open Window. And if you would like to skip directly to the story itself, you don't want to bother yourself with hearing about the author, I have put a little thing right here that will tell you where to go. So let me introduce you to Hector Hugh Munro, better known by his pen name as Saki. He was born in 1870 in British Burma and he was raised in England. And he became probably, I would say, one of the most celebrated short story writers of the Edwardian era. He was known for his razor-sharp wit, dark humor, and ability to expose the absurdities of upper-class society. I've read multiple of his works on this channel before, and all of them have, normally they have a little bit more of like an underlying tone of like, they are trying to comment on something happening in society currently, and they have this very witty type of humor. His literary career was cut short. However, he died in action in World War I in 1916, but his legacy lives on. Besides The Open Window, he wrote many other acclaimed works like Tobermory, The Chartres Metterclume Method, and the collections Reginald, Beasts and Super Beasts, and The Chronicles of Clovis. He is remembered as a master of the short story form, and The Open Window remains one of the finest examples of storytelling with a twist. So grab a seat, maybe leave a window open if you dare, and let's dive into one of the wittiest stories I think I've read on this channel. It's very funny. Without further ado, let's get on with the video. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next. The Open Window by Saki. My aunt will be down presently, Mr. Nuttall, said a very self-possessed young lady of 15. In the meantime, you must try and put up with me. Frampton Nuttall endeavored to say the correct thing, something which should duly flatter the niece of the moment without unduly discounting the aunt that was to come. Privately, he doubted more than ever whether these formal visits on a succession of total strangers would do very much towards helping the nerve cure, which he was supposed to be undergoing. I know how it is, his sister had said when he was preparing to migrate to this rural retreat. You will bury yourself down there and not speak to a living soul, and your nerves will be worse than ever from moping. I shall just give you letters of introduction to all people I know there. Some of them, as far as I can remember, were quite nice. Frampton wondered whether Miss Sappleton, the lady whom he was presenting one of the letters of introduction, came in to the nice division. Do you know many people around here? Asked the niece when she judged that they had had sufficient silent communion. Hardly a soul, said Frampton. My sister was staying here at the rectory, some 4 years ago, and she gave me letters of introduction to some of the people here. He made the last statement in a tone of distant regret. Then you know nothing of my aunt, pursued the self-possessed young lady. Only her name and address, admitted the caller. He was wondering whether Miss Sappleton was in the married or widowed state. An undefinable something about the room seemed to suggest masculine habitation. Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago, said the child. That would be since your sister's time. Her tragedy? Asked Frampton. Somehow, in this restful contrary spot, tragedies seemed out of place. You may wonder why we keep that window wide open on an October afternoon, said the niece, indicating a large French window that opened onto the lawn. It is quite warm for this time of year, said Frampton. But has that window got anything to do with our tragedy? Out through that window, 3 years ago today, her husband and her two younger brothers went off for their day's shooting. They never came back. In crossing the moor to their favorite snipe shooting ground, they were all three engulfed in a treacherous piece of bog. It had been dreadful wet summer, and places that were safe in other years gave way suddenly without warning. Their bodies were never recovered. That was a dreadful part of it. Here, the child's voice lost its self-possessed note and became falteringly human. Poor aunt always thinks that they will come back some day, they and the little brown spaniel that was lost with them, and walk in at that window, just as they used to do. That is why the window is kept open every evening till it is quite dusk. Poor dear aunt, she has often told me how they went out. Her husband with his white waterproof coat over his arm, and Ronnie, her youngest brother, singing, "Bertie, why don't you bound?" And he always did tease her, because she said it got on her nerves. Do you know, sometimes, on still, quiet nights like this, I almost get a creepy feeling that they will all walk in through that window. She broke off into a little shudder. It was relief to Frampton when the aunt bustled into the room with a whirl of apologies for being late in the making of an appearance. "I hope Vera has been amusing you," she said. "She has been very interesting," said Frampton. "I hope you don't mind the open window," said Miss Ambleton briskly. "My husband and brothers will be home directly from the shooting, and they always come in this way. They've been out for a snipe in the marshes today, so they'll make a fine mess over my poor carpets. So like you menfolk, isn't it?" She rattled on cheerfully about the shooting, and to the scarcity of birds, and the prospects for duck in the winter. To Frampton it was all purely horrible. He made a desperate, only partially successful effort to turn the talk to a less ghastly topic. He was conscious that his hostess was giving him only a fragment of her attention, and her eyes were constantly straying past him to the open window and the lawn beyond. It was certainly an unfortunate coincidence that he should have paid his visit on this tragic anniversary. The doctors agree in ordering me a complete rest and an absence of mental excitement and avoidance of anything in the nature of violent physical exercise, announced Frampton, who labored under the tolerably widespread delusion that total strangers and chance acquaintances are hungry for the least detail of one's ailments and infirmities, their cause and cure. On the matter of diet, they are not so much in agreement, he continued. "No?" said Miss Sampleton, in a voice that only replaced a yawn at the last moment. But suddenly she brightened into alert attention, but not to what Frampton was saying. "Here they are at last," she cried, "just in time for tea. And don't they look as if they were muddy up to the eyes?" Frampton shivered slightly and turned towards the niece with a look intended to convey sympathetic comprehension. The child was staring out of the open window with a dazed horror in her eyes. In a chill shock of the nameless fear, Frampton swung round in his seat and looked in the same direction. In deepening twilight, 3 figures were walking across the lawn towards the window. They all carried guns under their arms, and one of them was additionally burdened with a white coat hung over his shoulders. A tired brown spaniel kept close at their heels. Noiselessly they neared the house, and then a hoarse young voice chanted out of the dusk, "I said, Bertie, why do you bound?" Frampton grabbed wildly at his stick and hat, and the door and the gavel drive and the front gate were dimly noted stages in his headlong retreat. A cyclist coming along the road had to run into the head to avoid imminent collision. "Here we are, dear," said the bearer of the white mackintosh, coming in through the door. "Fairly muddy, but most of it's dry." "Who's that who bolted out as soon as we came up?" "A most extraordinary man, a Mr. Nuttall," said Miss Sappleton. "Could only talk about his illnesses and dashed off without a word of goodbye or apology when you arrived. One would think he had seen a ghost." I expect it was a spaniel, said the niece calmly. He told me as a horror of dogs. He once hunted into a cemetery somewhere on the banks of the Ganges by a pair of pariah dogs and had to spend the night in a newly dug grave with the creature snarling and grinning and foaming just above him, enough to make anyone lose their nerve. Romance at a short notice was her specialty. The end.
So that was The Open Window by Saki, or H.H. Munro. Now, this is a deceptively simple narrative that revolves around this nervous man named Frampton Nuttall, who is visiting the countryside for essentially just some therapeutic rest. There he meets this young girl named Vera, who tells them this haunting story about the open window in the sitting room. What follows is a very brilliant twist that leaves us both amused and almost reflective. So at the heart of this story is a theme of fabrication. How stories can influence perception and manipulative belief. Vera's tall tale is told with such natural poise and detail that both Frampton and the reader are taken in. This theme explores how fiction and truth can blur and how storytelling can be used not just to entertain, but to deceive. The final line is romance at short notice was her specialty, which kind of reveals how Vera had this creative talent and deliberate manipulation. Obviously, if we had read the story from maybe her point of view, it would have been much, much different. However, because we are reading it through Frampton's, or not Frampton's point of view, but through this narrator's point of view, it is very different. Frampton Nuttall kind of represents the socially awkward outsider. He is just seeking solitude and rest, but instead he becomes a victim of this psychological prank. His retreat into rural calm becomes this comic tragedy of miscommunication, and it kind of reveals how fragile our perception can be under a lot of stress. Vera, which I actually think her name is so interesting because her name ironically means truth. She embodies the cleverness and mischievousness of youth. The story kind of subtly suggests the power dynamics between children and adults and how the adult world often underestimates the younger kid. I mean, why would Vera have any reason for lying about this, right? But as the story progresses, we're okay, either the aunt is just absolutely insane or something's off here. I thought this was such a wonderful story. The tone is very light, it's very ironic, it's deceptively calm. It builds suspense with a very dry, almost mundane realism before completely pulling the rug underneath us. You can literally hear me laughing as I talk about Nuttall or Frampton just leaving, rushing out, because I'm oh, I see what's happened. But I would say the story is so interesting. It is essentially a story within a story, because Vera's fabricated tale becomes this false narrative that's nested inside the actual thing, what's actually happening. This is a third-person limited, that's what I was looking for, third-person limited perspective. So because of that, we are very close to Frampton's thoughts, but it allows Vera's story to very much mislead us. I would say this is still a very popular short story today just because it has that timeless humor, that wit. It is a masterclass in short story structure, and it's short enough to be a humorous story. However, at the same time, I would not characterize it in flash fiction or anything like that. It is still a short story. It is a proper short story. But that is the end of this video. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you would like me to read next.